Ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon for the ISAS seminar on one of the frequently discussed topics has been Iran. And this afternoon we'll be discussing Iran's ties with South Asia, strategic alliance or geographical destiny. We have with us Dr. Bazoobandi, who is a visiting research fellow at the Middle East Institute. She's a Middle East economic analyst with particular research interest in energy economics and political economy of the Gulf oil-rich countries. She has extensive research publications on various aspects of Gulf sovereign wealth funds. She has recently published a book on Gulf sovereign wealth funds, a case study of Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran. We are particularly interested in looking at what is happening inside Iran, given that Iran is being alienated due to the fact of its controversial nuclear program. The economic and political isolation of Iran has motivated the Iran government to create new alliances elsewhere. And as the West and the regional allies of the West have turned their back on Iran, Iran is also looking at other areas, and especially in Asia. Moreover, high demand of energy in some of the large Asian economies has been the driving factor for the economic and sometimes political collaboration between Iran and its Asian allies. In addition, Iran's foreign policy challenges and the complex problems the country is facing, particularly post-presidential election crisis of 2009, is something which needs to be debated and looked at as Iran progresses to its own process of transition. It's a combination of domestic as well as foreign policy struggle of Iran that has put the country at a critical crossroad. In light of this current economic and political challenges, Dr. Bazoobandi will discuss Iran's foreign policy dealing with three major South Asian countries, that is Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. We'll have the discussion, the presentation for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have an interactive session. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Shanti. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. We've been trying to arrange this presentation for a few weeks. A combination of hard work between our MEI and ISAS. So it's great to be finally here today with you. Speaking about the dimensions of the relationship between Iran and the South Asian countries, which are focus of this talk today, I would like to start with giving you a brief overview of the domestic issues in Iran, specifically political domestic issues that Iran is dealing with today. We've all witnessed what happened in 2009 at the controversial election of 2009. Some people in Iran, some activists would like to refer to it as what triggered the Arab Spring across the region. Some would like to see it as a sign of weakness for the revolutionary regime. But what is most important and the most important impact of that particular period of time and that event on today's condition in Iran is that most of the disagreements and the tensions domestically amongst the political elite in Iran has surfaced since that particular incident. And sort of one of the major evidences for such argument that these political fractions have surfaced was when the Supreme Leader announced that should it be needed, Iran is ready to completely eliminate the role of presidents and change the constitution. So he sent this message across that he's not willing anymore to share the power with anybody else. Having a reformist president in the office, i.e. ex-President Khatami, was particularly difficult for the Supreme Leader because of the disagreements between the two parties and the two, since Iran doesn't really have official political parties, the two camps I would refer to them. But the experience of the past 8 years have proven that not necessarily a fundamentalist president can get along with the Supreme Leader either. The next incident which I would like to bring to your attention in terms of the fraction, the internal fraction in Iranian political system was the latest parliamentary election, which happened in March 2012, in which most of the candidates who supported Ahmadinejad's camp were either sort of not accredited by the Council of the Guardian to take part in the election, or they simply lost. So the entire arrangement of the parliament has also been changed in favor of the Supreme Leader, as opposed to its previous arrangement, which was mainly in harmony with the policies of the president. And as a result of that election, 2 weeks after the election result was announced, the president was summoned to the parliament for a question and answer. That question and answer session wasn't particularly fruitful, and the president mainly made fun of most of the comments that the parliament, the members, the MPs have made in that meeting. But nevertheless, it was seen by the observers as one of the signs of disagreement between the Supreme Leader and President Ahmadinejad. The next event was about 1 month after the parliamentary election, when the Minister of Intelligence, Mr. Muslihi, was announced his resignation. And traditionally, although there are lots of these practices in Iran which are not necessarily in accordance with the constitution, but nobody really objects them because this is what the Supreme Leader wants, basically. And this has been one of those cases where traditionally the Supreme Leader has been the person who chooses the Minister of Intelligence. And the President has very little say on this decision and this appointment. But because of the disagreement between the President and the Minister of Intelligence, the Minister announced his resignation, and that wasn't well received by the Supreme Leader. As a result, the President didn't go to his office for 11 days, and in the end, he accepted the withdrawal of the resignation of the Minister, and he came back to the office, and the President wasn't clearly happy with this decision, but that was what the Supreme Leader wanted, and it happened. And there has been a series of similar incidents, similar cases where individuals who are mainly from the president's camp have been either accused for financial fraud, or they've been asked to be dismissed by the Supreme Leader, unofficially, obviously. In general, the president has been sort of marginalized, or perhaps the Supreme Leader has tried to marginalize his power and prove the point that I have the upper hand, basically, in the political system. So the message that I want to take to the next part of the presentation from all of this background is that the situation internally is extremely intense. The tension and the disagreement between the Supreme Leader and the President's office has been very intense, and the government of Iran is facing, regardless of the internal issues amongst the elites, in terms of the relationship between the regime and the people, that the government is extremely suffering from a very severe legitimacy crisis, if you like, which had never been the case probably since the revolution in 1979. So with having this in mind, I would like to move to the second part of the presentation, in which I will look at these 3 different countries, case by case, highlight the major political and economic issues between Iran and these countries, and just as a little housekeeping, if you like, or assumption, to begin this part of the presentation, I would like to bring it to your attention that I intentionally excluded issues like the security engagement, the security tension between Iran and these countries, and the ideological relations. So I know that Iran, being an Islamic government, Islamic country, and most of these countries, Islamic Shia countries, so to speak, and most of these countries being Islamic Sunni countries, so there has been this tension, but I really am not a theologist, so for that particular reason, I just left that particular debate out of all the discussion. starting with Afghanistan, perhaps Iran's interest in Afghanistan has been most amongst the three countries for a series of reasons. In terms of the political interest, of course, Iran has had a long-standing historical, cultural, language relation with Afghanistan, and there has been this flow of people, especially since the war and before the war, probably since the war in Afghanistan, it's been only one way from Afghanistan to Iran, but before that it was a bilateral movement between people from both countries. And Iran has managed to establish its power in one way or another in Afghanistan, in the sense that one of the advisors of President Karzai at some point said that any government in Afghanistan will not succeed to run the country unless they have the support of the Iranians. So more or less in this sense, what Iran's strategy being in Afghanistan is very similar to what it was in Iraq. In Iraq, to some extent, one could argue that maybe Iranian government have managed to hold their power and maintain their influence in the current Iraqi government. And perhaps this is what they're after in Afghanistan, specifically from 2017 onwards, when the coalition forces are going to leave Afghanistan. But having said the huge interest of Iran in Afghanistan, one needs to have this in mind that Iran's interest in Afghanistan, in compare with other parts in the region, specifically the Levant and the Gulf region, has been much less because of more strategic reasons. Basically, if I would wanted to count Iran's reasons and priorities, if you like, for engagement in Afghanistan, one of the reasons would be very similar to the case in Iraq. Iran has used Afghanistan as a proxy war, a place to have proxy war with the Americans. The second would be that Afghanistan has always been used by Iran, again similar to Iraq, as a bargaining chip by Iranians in terms of their nuclear negotiation with the West. And finally, Iran's current economic environment is a very volatile, and the country is struggling with huge economic issues, inflation, unemployment, problems with providing medicine, medication, import, export, currency crash, and a whole host of other issues. So the U.S. sanctions, economic sanctions on Iran, have had a major effect on Iranian economy over the past 30 years, and specifically since December 2011, when they increased and sort of raised the bars for Iran. So Afghanistan is definitely one of those cases that Iran very much would like to use as a bargaining chip in negotiations for the sanctions with the U.S. government. In terms of economic relations with with Afghanistan, Iran have used its resources in many parts in the region. Iran support with Hamas, Iran support with Hezbollah, Iran support with militia groups in Iraq, and somewhat similar case in Afghanistan in this sense that the financial aids which have gone through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, or IRGC, I refer to them, they have been targeting the Afghan members of the parliament in order to drum support for anti-US sort of debate in Afghan parliament. At some point, I think it was in 2011, some reports and some numbers that I looked at, somewhere between 500 to 700,000 euro in only one payment. So it's not a huge amount of money in such payments, but it is still an evidence to prove that Iran has a relationship, interest in buying support in Afghanistan. The next interesting point that I found in terms of the financial aid was 35,000 Afghan citizens being enrolled in the payroll of the Imam Khomeini Relief Fund, which is targeting the poor, the marginalized citizens, Iranians specifically, but because of various
issues and obviously the huge interest of Iran in Afghanistan, these Afghan citizens have also been enrolled on this program. The next economic interest, if I wanted to mention, would be the constructions that Iran, construction projects that Iran's been carrying out in Afghanistan. Namely, one of the major projects which have already finished is a highway between the borders in Iran and Herat, which half of it was built by the Iranian, the other half was built by the Indians. And the next would be another project which is not exactly finished, but it's about to finish, another railway project between Khawaf and Herat. So again, Iran suffering, I mean, I worked in a construction company in Iran before I left Iran in 2005. And I witnessed that Iran is financially struggling, finding financial resources to fund construction projects domestically. So for Iran to go out of its way to make such investments in Afghanistan, that is again another proof of Iran's interest in that country. The next issue that I would like to raise is dependency of Afghan economy on the oil import from Iran. You know, Afghanistan, half of Afghanistan's oil consumption is going from Iran anyways, and it's in the scheme of things, and if you look at it and compare probably Afghan's consumption with other customers of Iranian oil like China or India, perhaps it's not very significant. Nevertheless, it's some of the links, or one of the links that Iran very much would like to maintain and would like to keep this sort of dependency relation in which Afghanistan relies on Iranian oil. And as a result of that, a 25-kilometer oil pipeline has been negotiated. It's not really started yet, but it's been negotiated that it will be connecting Iranian depots within the territory of Iran to Afghan depots on the other side of the border, instead of the tankers driving back and forth on the highways. And the next sort of project, construction project that is going on, still under negotiation, is the Chabahar port, which is a port in southeast of Iran. And Iran is very keen on connecting that port via railway to Afghanistan in order to facilitate movements of goods from that port to the cities in Afghanistan. And India is obviously supporting that project. I will get back to it in more details, because it's in a way or another, it kind of bypasses Pakistan. So this is something that there is a mutual interest between Iran and India, and hence the financial negotiations between the two countries to find enough resources to build that project. In addition to all of these various interests that Iran holds in maintaining its relation with Afghanistan, both in economic and political perspective, there has been some challenges on the way as well. To highlight a few of them, there is a huge water dispute between Afghanistan and Iran. There is a river which comes from Hindu Kush mountains, goes to the Sistan Balochistan province in Iran, and in 1973 there has been a treaty between the Shah and the government of Afghanistan, in which the Afghan government commits to allow a certain number of water to flow to Iran. But there has been incidents, especially during the Taliban regime, where that flow of water was stopped, and there are other construction projects to build a couple of dams on that river in Afghanistan, which have been funded by the Indian companies, which was not very well received in Iran. And there are all these conspiracy theories that there's been a couple of explosions, people got kidnapped, engineers had different types of accidents, and mostly Iran has been blamed for these incidents, because probably Iran is the major stakeholder and holds most interest in not allowing these projects to come to stream. The next challenge, which has caused huge outcry both in Afghanistan and in Iran, in political and civil society level, has been the issue of the immigrants, Afghan immigrants in Iran. The Iranian government, for some reasons, all of a sudden decided that they want to send most of these people back. For many years, they've been denied access to education, to healthcare. Even if an Iranian citizen marries an Afghan citizen, the children of that marriage are not entitled to, never mind citizenship, they're not even entitled to have an identity card by which they can enroll to schools and so forth. They've been denied access to have work permits, for example. So most of the Afghans who are left in Iran at the moment, they are illegal immigrants technically, and they don't have a right to work. Except for a certain period of time during the war, some of these Afghan citizens who went to the war voluntarily and sort of joined the Iranian army to defend Iran against Iraqi army, except those people are the only people who actually got permanent residency and are legal. And the children of those families, obviously, they still live in Iran or elsewhere. But other than that, most of this issue, most of these people have been, very controversial. This issue, and at some point, for example, it was last Nowruz, if I recall correctly, where the governor of Shiraz put a sign outside of one of the public parks in the city and said, no Afghan citizen in this park. And that caused a huge outcry that activists, Iranians from outside Iran, inside Iran. But in the end, there has been no particular improvement in terms of the legislation or the government actual implementation of the policy. And finally, last but not least, is the issue of drug trafficking from Afghanistan to Iran. The drug problem in Iran is huge. A very high number of Iranian youth are struggling with that issue, and Afghanistan obviously has been one of those loose states nearby where most of these flow of narcotic, if you like, have been entering the country, and at some point the Iranian government, some officials in the government accused the enemies of Iran, as always, for using Afghanistan as a proxy, as a channel to bring these inside Iran or hidden plots against Iran's national security. Again, in one way or another, they accuse the West for using Afghanistan to attack Iran's national security in that sense. I would like now to move to the next country, Pakistan. I've already spoken for 20 minutes. Pakistan is much less friendly to Iran. I've seen various quotes by various analysts that they refer to Iran-Pakistan relationship as a dysfunctional relationship. Although the Shah was very friendly to the government of Pakistan, but especially since the revolution, the situation has got worse. The Shah was probably one of the only regional leaders who acknowledged the government of Pakistan after the coup, but then since the revolution, that situation has somewhat changed. One of the obvious reasons is that Pakistan has always supported the Taliban and has close ties to Saudi government, which in one way or another is supporting balancing the role of Saudi Arabia, which balances the role of Iran in Afghanistan. So the Saudis try to maintain a close relationship with Pakistan in order to counter the influence of Iranians in Afghanistan. The next issue is the whole Shia-Sunni crisis. This ongoing debate in the region, which as much as I wanted to stay out of it, I couldn't, and I had to very briefly touch upon this issue. And for example, there is this militia Islamist group, Iranian, called Jundullah, and they are more or less doing the same thing as Mujahideen Khalq, which was the other opposition group in Iran, mainly after the revolution. They were active militarily against the Iranian government with the support of Saddam Hussein, and they still have a base near Baghdad. So in a smaller scale, the way that the Pakistani government is accommodating Jundullah is being received in Tehran as a similar scenario with Mujahideen Khalq and Saddam Hussein. And of course, Pakistan being the first Islamic government in the region, Iranian revolution, Islamic revolution has also been sort of causing some discomforts in relation, because the Pakistani government has been mainly following Sunni ideology, and there is a rival in the region next door where we are sharing borders with, who happen to be a Shia government. So that's another cause of tension. And finally, this whole dimension of India-Pakistan relationship, that Iran, in one way or another, tries to use that card against both countries whenever it's suitable. So Iran is happy to gang up with the Indians against the Pakistani government to win something from them, and the other way around. And this has been probably the case with Pakistan by many countries, and it's not only Iran. So that's been a very used pattern, if you like, in Pakistan's foreign policy. The next issue that I would like to raise is that it's true that there are all these tensions between Iran and Pakistan, but there are a couple of issues a couple of concerns that the two countries share with one another. One of them is the most important one, perhaps, is the nationalist resistance in Balochistan province. Balochistan province has been problematic in both Pakistan and in Iran. So the Baluchis, there are movements amongst the Baluchi population in both sides of the country, both sides of the borders, where they want a unified Balochistan. Fairly similar to the scenario with the Kurds, the Turkish Kurds, the Syrians, the Iraqi Kurds, and the Iranians. So in a sense, that the Iranian government and the Turkish government and Saddam Hussein government have never been shy, for example, to join forces to suppress the Kurdish population. And that the same more or less applies to the policy of Iranian government and Pakistani government against about the Baluchis. And the next issue is, of course, beyond 2014, Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, so both Pakistan and Iran are fairly anxious for very understandable reasons that what will happen beyond 2014, where there's not going to be much coalition presence in Afghanistan. In terms of economic interest, Iran perhaps has much less economic relation with Pakistan than it has with India. But nonetheless, there are some projects in the pipeline, quite ambitious ones. Some of them, for example, this Iran-Pakistan or IP pipeline, which is supposed to transfer up to 65% of Pakistani gas consumption from Iran. It is quite challenging. It's not going to happen very easily. For very basic reasons, for example, financing this project, the Iranians and the Pakistanis approached the Chinese and Russian banks, and they haven't had much luck in that sense. And also the other issue is the security threat, which remains a challenge for both governments. But that's something that both countries are hoping that it will materialize. If I move to India before I wrap up the presentation, I would say that the highlight of relationship between India and Iran is the energy interest. Iran has oil, which is Iran desperate for. Mine is on tripod. Iran has oil that is desperate to sell. India has huge consumption. desperate to cover the demand. So it's a sort of a marriage of convenience between the two, and it has proven to work well so far. Iran is the second largest seller of oil to India, which covers almost 12% of Iranian crude production, according to 2011 figures. And at the same time, Iran is importing 40% of its imported gasoline from India. So there is a huge bond in that sense between the two countries. Iran has tried to prove its goodwill, if you like, to appreciate the support of the Indian government, especially at the peak of the crisis and the sanctions and the EU oil embargo, etc. And to show this appreciation, basically, Iran has offered really good terms of payment, and of course, because of sanctions, the Indian banks are not really legally allowed to make any transaction to the Iranian banks. But Iran also accepts rupee payments, accepts non-cash payments in terms of rice, tea, jewelry, etc. Offered really good discounts, about $1.2, $1.5 per barrel, which is adds up to a huge number if you look at the aggregate flow of oil export. The other interest that Iran is very much, again, enthusiastic to maintain is investments by Indian companies. Again, because of the sanctions, Iran has not been very successful in attracting foreign direct investment. Most of these foreign companies have left since 2008. And the only probably financiers who are left in Iran are China and India. And those guys are also kind of investing and at the same time not investing. So they are doing one step forward, two steps backwards. In a sense, they are just leaving their feet on the ground and waiting for the doors to open. So they're waiting for the sanctions to be lifted, and they want to be first in line, but they don't really want to invest or jeopardize their relationship with the West or be a subject of penalties because of breaching the sanctions. A good example for such policies is this gas extraction project in Gulf, which is called Bazoobandi, if I'm not mistaken. It's a $5 billion project. The Indian partner have only invested so far 36 million out of 5 billion. The contract started in 2008, and as a result of this, it's reached to higher levels at the foreign ministry level. Iran Foreign Ministry wrote a letter a few months ago to Indian Foreign Ministry saying that if you do not get your act basically together and start doing something about this project, we are willing to give it to a third-party company. Of course, the Indians cannot really afford to not maintain good relations with the West, but at the same time, they don't really want to cut all the relations with Iranians. So it kind of remains into this dilemma and this limbo, if you like, that no particular conclusion came out of it. In terms of political relation between Iran and India, of course, one of the good reasons for these two countries to every now and again make very good friends is Pakistan. And the example, which is sort of like personification, if you like, it's not even the right word to use, but I will use it anyways, of this interest is that railway that I mentioned between Chabahar and Herat, which will bypass the Gouda port in Pakistan. The other interesting political sort of alliance, sign of political alliance, if you like, between the two countries was the New Delhi Declaration, which commits two countries and links the two countries to a set of bilateral strategic partnerships. And the final issue that I briefly mentioned earlier is that the Indians cannot really afford to not please the West, especially the U.S. administration. For that reason, they've tried, even though they maintained good relations every now and again with Iran, there has been little acts here and there that they try to prove to the Americans that we are with you, but we're not really with you at the same time. For example, they issued an open arrest warrant against 3 Iranian citizens who were suspected for the bombings of the Israeli embassy vehicle in New Delhi. And also there was this Asian custom union which was under negotiation. It was an agreement between some of the major Asian players, including India, and that was to clear oil payments from Iran internally rather than connecting it to the international financial system. But the Indians have pushed for termination of that agreement, that union, because that would have been an obvious violation of the sanctions on Iran. So at this point, I will do my best to link whatever I said so far together and come up with some sort of conclusion, and we'll open it to debate after that. Something that the first item in my conclusion list is going back to Iran's domestic problems, domestic challenges, and the issue of legitimacy of Iranian government. Iran's foreign policy, in general, very much changed since the beginning of Khatami's administration, perhaps in mid-90s, from what it was since the beginning of the revolution. Since the beginning of the revolution until that particular period of time, Iran was very much of the exporting the revolution to the neighbouring countries, especially to the rest of the world, especially to the neighbouring countries. But since then, the major concerns and major elements of Iranian foreign policy have been national security and regime survival. So that is one particular sort of conclusion that I would like to raise here. The second issue is obviously Iran's relation with Afghanistan and Pakistan has had hugely to do with Iran's relation with the US. So in my humble opinion, if Iran and the US managed to somewhat reach to some sort of agreement through the course of these upcoming negotiations after June 2013, perhaps Iran's relation with Afghanistan and Pakistan would be much different than it is today. The third conclusion is that having said that, the U.S. has a huge role in forming Iran's policies in Afghanistan, and that relationship between the U.S. and Iran might change the dimensions between Iran and Afghanistan. But I still believe that because of the movement of people, immigration, drug problems, border security, Iran still needs to maintain fairly stable relations with the two neighboring countries. Maybe it would be a different case with India, so we could leave that open for discussion. But specifically with Afghanistan and Pakistan, that should not be very much the case. And finally, because of a combination of factors, firstly China's economic rise and China's huge demand for Iranian oil, China's balancing the power of the US globally, Iran not being able to have access to the US markets or to have good political relations with the American administration, in one way or another Iran kind of leaned towards the East, mainly to China and Russia. So in order to balance that dependence on China, Iran very much likes to keep India in the picture. So it's important for Iran to maintain good relations with Indians for the rainy day, whenever, if Chinese at the end of the day decided not to buy Iranian oil or not to maintain or not to support Iran's government, it's good to have a fairly equal power in the region. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Sarah, for an excellent presentation and overview of both the domestic and the foreign policy questions and the formulations which actually dictates the Iran government's gestures towards these three countries. And given that you have an evolving situation in Afghanistan and the fact that Pakistan is also important to Iran, we also will have to look at the areas post-2014 Afghanistan where there could be issues of collaboration. But having said that, I have a few questions in the sense of maybe starting a debate, and maybe we can take the questions and then get on to my question. But broadly, when you look at Afghanistan, you really don't get a sense of what really Iran wants in that country. There are issues which are destabilizing for Iran, like you rightly pointed out, the refugee and the drug. It wants to stabilize Afghanistan because return of Taliban is not in Iran's interest. But having said that, you also have the US presence by which you have a proxy war going on between Iran and US, and thereby you have Iranians actually supporting a lot of segment of the insurgency that's based in Taliban. So thereby, there is a connection between Iran and Pakistan on that count. There is an alliance between the Taliban, the Gulbuddin Hekmatyar faction, and the insurgency, and thereby Iran and Pakistan are actually coming closer. If you notice what happened after the non-alignment summit and the various gestures Pakistan has made towards Iran. So there's, I think, one area we need to look at whether these two countries can really collaborate, given that you have issues in Sistan, Balochistan, you have issues in Afghanistan. And when you're looking at India, I mean, it's true that it is the energy relationship which has been driving, and you've rightly pointed out that India actually has to balance a lot of interests, given that its relationship and strategic partnership with US is important, but it also wants to maintain ties with Iran, and that we see it in Afghanistan, the way things are evolving. There are tripartite commissions between India, US, Afghanistan, then you have India, Iran, Afghanistan, and you have a lot of these regional groupings which are coming on. But India is more of playing a role of a balancer. And Iran is trying to fit into that kind of an image. So one really needs to understand the dynamics and the geopolitics of the region and the great power politics which are being played out. Like, as you rightly pointed out, Iran is looking towards China, looking more east. So what would that mean to US relations with the rest of the South Asian countries? So it's a very fluid area at this point of time, and given that the Americans are in a great rush to leave Afghanistan, they might come to some understanding with Iran on Afghanistan. And you might also have a situation where Iran and Pakistan actually collaborating. You really, I mean, you did elaborate a bit on the Zaranj-Dalalam, the highway, but we don't get a sense of how much of it is actually being used. I've tried to dig data, I've gone to Herat, and I've seen a lot of Iranian influence. And when you look at that kind of influence, you know that Afghanistan will never have an independent economy because it's dependent on Iran. So when you look at Afghanistan as an instability paradox, you also wonder about the regional countries' role and thereby Iran's role. So like your thoughts on this during discussion. Happy to take questions now, if anyone has questions. Yes, please.
I find it interesting that, given that 2 of 3 Iranian neighbors that we discussed, the nuclear powers didn't mention the nuclear issue. That hasn't played into it.
You mean Iran's nuclear ambitions as a tool that Iran wants to somewhat protect itself, being neighbors to these nuclear powers?
If Iran becomes a nuclear power, it's going to change the strategic balance in the region. That must be an issue that must be backed up.
Would you like to take some more questions? Yes.
Thank you. I was just wondering, because you had categorized the Iran-India relations mainly from the economic and the energy perspective. And I think for the past few years, we've seen that China is really increasing its trade with Iran for oil and for gas. I mean, probably greater than India, for gas especially. So in that case, and China has also supported Iran quite a bit against the international community. So would, assuming that in future this relationship grows stronger, whether based on energy or otherwise, what would that imply for the Iran-India relations, since that is based mainly on energy as well?
So you mean Iran-China
Yeah.
grows stronger?
Yeah.
Have any more questions?
what do you think of when the state, let's take India and assume that with all its difficulties and drawbacks, it will eventually reach a position of being really a major power in the region. Its natural tendency would be, since now the relationship between Pakistan and India has improved, hopefully would go on improving, that India is looking west will have to take Iran very much into consideration. That's one. The second is what's happened this morning in the United Nations, where the Palestinians have got the vote to be a non-state member of the UN. That's going to have a tremendous effect in the Middle East. The third is a personal question between us and Singapore and Iran. I don't know whether we import any oil. Do you have any idea of whether we import oil from Iran or not? But I do know that in my time, as a foolish young man, I told the government of Singapore, I said, what the hell, I don't care what the Americans do to Iran, but they send their oil here for refining. So why shouldn't we open up relations? So I took the first delegation from Singapore to Iran, because of course, Iranians being what they are beautiful hosts. But we didn't manage to do anything at that time. But I just wanted to know whether we have any relationship with Iran.
There is a bit.
There's a bit. That's what I told Tom. I said, what the hell? We don't care what the Americans do. It's our self-interest. Let's go and open Iran. Now there's going to be a lot of people now saying, what the hell we have to do with American control of the situation in the Middle East, which is rapidly disappearing. So the whole situation can change to the benefit. I'm not talking politics, I'm talking of trade relations and goodwill relations, etc. between peoples who have, over the centuries, have had relationships which are inherent in their culture today.
Thank you. So I'll attempt to answer these questions. I'll start with your first question, whether Iran-Pakistan relation will eventually become friendly or not. If we put Iran's interest out of the picture, the situation with Pakistan has been always the case, and it's not only in my opinion. I've listened to many people who analyze Pakistan and monitor Pakistan closely, and they are in a much better position to comment on this than myself. Traditionally, it has been the case that Pakistan has very little to offer to the global community, to the neighbouring countries, etc. So as a result of that, every now and again, over different periods of time, Pakistan had to shift alliance from one side to the other in order to maintain their situation. So if there is going to be an absolute point that the relationship is going to be 100% positive and friendly, quite frankly, I don't think that it would be that important for Iran at any time soon that Iran would really want to maintain such relation. Even, for example, even Turkey, which is a very close ally to Iran, in different positions, Iran has proven that we can be with you, we can be not with you.
Given the pipelines, the IPI, the energy pipelines.
Yes, if that materializes, which is a still very ambitious project, if that materializes in the end, it would be a huge step. And they are working on a freight channel, if I'm not mistaken, from Afghanistan all the way to Turkey as well. So all these projects are in the pipeline that they will make the links between Iran and these countries stronger, i.e. Afghanistan and Pakistan. but whether or not, and it very much, in my understanding, depends on how Iran is going to do with the rest of the world and with the Gulf as well. So those countries, those regions are much more important to Iran, and they are going to be much more important to Iran than Afghanistan and Pakistan. Afghanistan and Pakistan are still important, but they are not, if you put them in the context that if Iran has to focus on the Gulf versus Pakistan, they will probably choose the Gulf. Or if they have to choose between focusing on maintaining good relations with the West and Pakistan, they will choose the West. The next question was Iran-India relation, and India has been a balancer in the region, which I couldn't agree with you more. In Asia, it's true that East versus West, in a sense, have been kind of trying to balance each other, at least economically lately. But it's true that even amongst the Asian key players, there has been a balance of power challenge, sometimes in economic sense, sometimes in political sense, etc. So the relation between Iran and India, I would still believe that will remain more or less the same in this sense, that Iran will use India and Pakistan against one another. Iran will use India and China against one another. At some point, Iran uses Russia and China against each other to balance each other. So that has been probably the rule of the game in IR for many years, and I don't see there is going to be honestly any particular change in that particular front. In terms of relationship between Afghanistan and Iran and how economic activities in Afghanistan rely on Iran, and whether there is going to be any point that Afghanistan will emerge out of this dependency and influence of Iran, I would say that Iranians are very well prepared to maintain this influence. This is what Iran wants. Iran is a country which has had 8 years of war with a next-door neighbor. I lived in Iran during those years. Iran is traumatized enough to know that they need to have some sort of influence in the neighboring countries if they can, in the case of, for example, Iraq. And if they can maintain friendly relationship fairly, like Turkey, they're happy to do that. So this is something that Iran is investing on. This is something that Iran is after. I'm not particularly saying that that the ways in which Iran sometimes uses to tries to maintain this influence is exactly the best practice or the most moral friendly practice. Killing is bad. Suicidal bombing is always ugly. Supporting the Taliban is worse than all of them. But for very understandable reasons, if you put yourself in Iran's regime shoes, Iran needs to maintain this. And because, like again, I mentioned that the highlight of Iran's foreign policy is to maintain the regime and national security. So at any given cost, in any given point, in any given geographic location. So that is going to be the same. Whether Afghanistan is going to become powerful enough to cut this cord at any time soon, I honestly doubt that's going to happen. And also, it's especially recently a sort of interesting example of how Iran uses these loose states as loopholes to somewhat reach to and achieve what Iran is after. Since the crash of the rial about less than a year ago, Iran has had huge issues and problems with bringing the petrodollars back to the economy. Iran was kicked out of the SWIFT. Iran is the subject of all these sanctions. There were two major banks, German and Turkish, they were helping Iran to bring all these petrodollars back to Iran, and Iran now lost both of those. What Iran does instead is that Iran uses Afghanistan and Iraq to bring these these petrodollars. There was an Iraqi bank, which I can't unfortunately recall the name of the bank, but that was sort of flagged as one of the breaches of the sanctions. Another interesting example I had from my friends back in Iran is that people who are afraid of real losing its power, they take their real currency to Afghanistan and exchange it for dollar at a cheaper price. That they will get it in the bazaar in Tehran, right? And they technically go with bags of cash to Kabul or to Tehran, and they come back with bags of US dollars. So this all shows that Iran has an interest in maintaining the situation. In terms of nuclear power, look, as much as I really don't want personally Iran to become a nuclear power, I will just put that up front. I have nothing in support of Iranian nuclear program. Okay. But if you put yourself in the shoes of Iranian regime, let's assume for 5 minutes that I am Sayyid Ali Khamenei. Okay. I'm ruling a country where I have neighbors in the Gulf, Malik Abdullah, Saudi Arabia. WikiLeaks came out thanks to Julian Assange. He wrote to the US ambassador and he said, cut the snake's head, right? Snake being Iran. You come a little bit further north, you have Iraq, 8 years of war at the moment, American, Saudi influence, etc. You go a little bit further north, you have Turkey, emerging economic power in the region that Iran, not in 20 years, probably not going to be capable to compete with Turks. You have Georgia. And they have Israeli base, you have the NATO missile shield, you have the Russians over there, you have the Turkmens, fairly friendly, you have the Afghanistan, which is again a failed state, so to speak, and you have Pakistan, which is a nuclear power. So do you really not want to have nuclear power? Because, and I always said that, having nuclear power is not only to stabilize, to sort of maintain the regime internationally, it's also a big winning card for the Iranian government to control the power domestically. Because believe you me, Iranian citizens, they know that if Iran becomes nuclear power, there is going to be almost no hope for any democratic reform in Iran for any foreseeable future. So, of course, Iran is motivated by neighboring countries. Should Iran have that at the end of the day? How would the picture of the entire region change? I honestly think that it would be probably much different than it is today, because at the moment there is all these cards that they can play against Iran, economic sanctions, etc., international isolation, termination of the negotiation, etc. But as soon as Iran has that, there is very little bargaining power for the rest of the world. So it's going to be most probably either Iran's way or no way. I don't know. And at the same time, I was actually having dinner with one of my friends, who is my former boss back in London at Nomura. And he was saying that if I was Israel, tomorrow I would give nuclear thingy to Iran. And I just, there would be no way that they will use it against Israel. It will neutralize the relation between Iran and Israel. This is something that probably is the key behind all of these crises. And everybody would live happily ever after. So I'm really not sure. I really don't see myself in a position to give the final answer to this question. Iran, India, whether if it grows stronger, how is Iran-China relation going to work out? I think I somewhat attempted to answer this question previously. That of course, this whole balance of power game in every international relations theory textbook says it much better than I am capable ever to explain it. So this is the rule of the game. Unless the world comes into some sort of different system that we are not aware of today, it's going to be the system. So there are going to be powers. It should be India, China. Tomorrow it could be Singapore, perhaps, to be played against other powers. in try my little attempt in answering your question about Iran and Singapore or in trade. At some point in July, I was invited to give a comment in one of these Persian TV channels, and I digged into numbers about Singapore and Iran trade. According to 2011 figures, Iran-Singapore trade aggregate volume was $5 billion. But that doesn't only include oil crude export from Iran. It also covers most of these high-tech products that are re-exported or manufactured in Singapore to Iran. So I don't have an exact number about how much was Iran crude oil, but the aggregate trade volume was $5 billion in 2011. But of course, as James mentioned, it has been sort of broken down because of the sanctions.
There's been a lot of American pressure.
And actually, yes, it's very true. I remember I was invited to a talk at Singapore Business Federation. Somebody from U.S. Treasury, the U.S. Treasury representative in Southeast Asia or something like that, he was giving a presentation about how restricted the Americans are about these sanctions, specifically with Iran. And he said, for example, something I still remember from that presentation was that if you are teaching somebody something which will benefit, for example, I'm an Iranian citizen. I work for a Chinese company in China. I have nothing to do with Iran. I don't even do business with Iran. But if during your training as a Singaporean business, I learn that whatever it is that you're giving a training for, you are breaching the sanction. Because I'm a Iranian citizen after all. So it's that serious, the pressure from that.
We have another 5 minutes, so do you have any questions? Any more pressing questions? I'm sure it stimulated a kind of a discussion, and we had very useful points to ponder about. But if not, then I think, Sarah, I think just to wrap it up, as you look at the situation evolving in Iran and the region, especially South Asia, how do you see things going forward in the sense of the relationship between these three countries and the U.S.? And as I asked you before about accommodation with the U.S., will Afghanistan be one of the bargaining points with the U.S. for a kind of a release from the sanction? Or are we looking at a scenario where Iran is actually able to have a kind of a regional agreement with a lot of its neighbors? They are trying to play a proactive role in their own way, and we don't really get a sense of the regional diplomacy. So maybe if you can say that, and we can wrap up this discussion.
Sure. In terms of future of Iran's relation with South Asia or the rest of the neighboring countries for that matter, I would say that definitely Iran's U.S. relation will dominate and haunt these dimensions of Iran foreign policy for as long as the situation remains as it is. And what I mean by it is that whenever an American administration debate starts rolling about what should be the terms of negotiation with Iran, there comes the Saudis representing the rest of the Gulf, there comes the Israeli lobby in the US, there comes the Russians, there comes the Chinese, there comes the Iraqis on the other. So there should be, if there is any sort of agreement with Iran, it should be cohesive. And Iranians, I'm quoting somebody who has been engaged in track 2 negotiations with Iran. Apparently, I do not identify and I do not accept this, but apparently this is how it is. Iranians' negotiations start from whatever I have is mine, so whatever you have, let's negotiate about. Right? So this has been a challenge. This has been one of the key issues that the international community, the West, Americans, they've been dealing with. Iranians want something that includes everything. Okay, and whether they are going to get that everything that they want, the way that they want it, I highly doubt it, to be honest. And for as long as the situation remains, and unfortunately, it really hurts my heart saying this, that there is not going to be any sort of conclusion to this ambitions for negotiations after June 2013 between Iran and the States. And the reason, and because the other side of the story would be some sort of a strike against Iran. how is it going to take place, who is going to start it, how is it going to end, how is Iran going to react, who has what type of missile that goes further. I have absolutely no idea. But I lived in Iran and I lived under the war condition, and I'm telling you, I really don't wish any war for Iran to happen. But the other alternative is the negotiation, and I highly see that being sort of not really successful. Especially because I understand the mentality in Tehran, and I understand how the decision makers, the key decision makers in Tehran feel. So, going back to your question, South Asia, Iran dimension is going to remain haunted by the situation, and the future of negotiations between the international community, specifically the US and the government. I think it was a fairly depressing conclusion. I do apologize.
Not really, but your talk was very stimulating. So I think on that optimism, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot more questions coming on later, given that we don't have so much of expertise on Iran here and no much discussion occurring in this part of the world. I think it was a fantastic presentation based on your experience and your ideas and impressions of your travel there. So thank you, Sarah, for sparing time and coming over here. And I hope that after this we'll have a lot more questions on Iran coming up.
My pleasure. Thanks for
As
having
a
me.
token of appreciation, that's one.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.